Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to an in-depth Marvel Snap meta report looking at all the data according to Untapped.gg. We have got Black Swan, we've got Supergiant. We're going to talk about their impact on the meta, should you purchase these cards, and also look at the best decks for them. We're then going to look at the best decks in Infinite rank, or at least the best decks between the ranks of 70 and 100, which is the people that are looking to climb to Infinite at the start of the season. And then we're also going to take a look at the single best performing decks on Untapped. So lots of data to get through. First up, we've got Black Swan, the new season pass card. 57% win rate, which is not bad, and a pretty good average cube rate. However, I want to point out that these stats are massively inflated for a simple reason, which is that lots of people are just plugging Black Swan into Thanos. Thanos, of course, one of the best decks in the game and has been for a long time, and therefore I think that it's a little bit inflated in terms of the stats here, because in my experience, as I mentioned in my Black Swan video, I don't actually think that Black Swan is optimal in Thanos. She does a decent job, but I think often you're actually going to be preferring other cards, and it's just with the fact that she's new that people are plugging her into Thanos. So if we take a look at the best performing decks with Black Swan, we can see that Bounce is right up there, as well as a couple of Thanos decks. Now, I would say in Thanos, she's not optimal, and you're better off putting a different card in here. For example, this deck I think would be a lot better with just a simple Professor X, I have to say, instead of the Black Swan. So I actually don't think Black Swan is making the cut in Thanos decks. Now, she's a little bit more interesting when you're playing Valkyrie version with Khazar. Perhaps you could put a Sunspot in the mixer here as well. I'm probably going to be posting a video on that style of deck soon, but I would argue that this kind of Thanos deck is probably going to be performing better. But she's definitely interesting in a Khazar Valkyrie style of Black Swan deck. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, in terms of Bounce, I do think she's optimal in Bounce, but it's also important to remember that Beast got nerfed in the last 12 hours. It's now just a 2-cost card, which is good, but for Bounce overall, it's worse, because what you were looking to do with Beast is reduce the cost of everything permanently and then bounce stuff back multiple times. That is no longer really an option. So Black Swan is helping Bounce, but I don't think Bounce was particularly good before Black Swan was released, and now with the nerf to Beast, it's probably a little bit worse than it ever was. If you like Bounce, I would say Black Swan is worth checking out in Bounce decks, but I don't have the biggest belief in Bounce right now personally. I think it's okay, and therefore my review of Black Swan is she's a slightly above average card. However, in a game like Marvel Snap, where you only have 12 cards, there's no factions, you just pick 12 cards of any card you want, being slightly above average is probably not very good. So, for example, Mr. Fantastic, I would describe as an above average card, but it doesn't really see any competitive play because there's so many other cards to pick from. So, if you're looking to pick up Black Swan for the season pass just because you don't want to miss out on a really good card, avoid it. If you're looking to pick up Black Swan because you want to have a bit of fun with Bounce, you want to try out some Valkyrie Thanos decks, and you're already spending money on Marvel Snap each month and you're happy to invest in the season pass, you can go ahead and get it, because the season pass is good value for money in terms of resources. But I would avoid it personally if you're looking to not spend £120 every single year on Marvel Snap by buying the season pass. All right, next up, we have Supergiant. Supergiant is really interesting. Now, in comparison with Black Swan, her stats are better, her win rate's higher, her average cube rate is higher, and her popularity is higher. And that's also worth bearing in mind that Black Swan is being plugged into these Thanos decks a lot, where she's actually, that's probably inflating her stats somewhat. I think Supergiant is a complete belter of a card. I think this card is nuts. She's going to really be shaping the meta quite a bit, and I actually think that she's going to be proving to wind quite a lot of people up, because the combo that people are using with Supergiant is so toxic, it gives me anxiety every time I'm coming up against her. And the combo is using Lockdown. And as you can see, unsurprisingly, the top 4 decks with Supergiant are all Lockdown decks. So the combo is you play early on to get initiative. You play stuff like Storm, of course, to lock down the locations. Then on turn number 4, you play Supergiant. This means that your cards you play on turn 5 don't reveal till the end of the game. And that includes your opponents as well. You can then play Absorbing Man on turn number 5. And then on turn 6, you can play Eliath. If you have initiative, if you have Storm, that means that you can have Eliath into 2 different locations, and you're just going to be wiping down any card your opponent plays, which is so toxic. So this deck, if it gets ahead early on, just wins, and that is pretty gross. The other thing, of course, you could do, you could play the Absorbing Man on turn 5 and then Doctor Doom on turn 6, and then your Absorbing Man is a 4-cost Doctor Doom. So pretty toxic combos. Very interesting though. The other thing I don't like about these decks in general is the fact that Miss Marvel is so good in them, because Miss Marvel is, in my opinion, a bit of a pay-to-win card. I'm going to be making a full video on that. And you want to play Zabu with Supergiant, it just makes sense. So you can also just throw Miss Marvel into the mixer as well. And overall, that feels pretty damn toxic to me, that this very powerful card is supporting a pay-to-win card like Miss Marvel that was a Season Pass card and, of course, is still in Series 5. So if you're someone like me that decided to skip the Season Pass all those months ago, I now have this massive FOMO, and now I'm like, oh, Scar, oh, Black Swan, I have to get these cards in case they prove to be really amazing. I really don't like the pay-to-win aspect of that. But Supergiant, definitely a very good card. Pretty toxic card. Omega Red also just got buffed, so I could definitely see Omega Red making the cut. I think this is my favorite looking list of all of them, although I would whack Absorbing Man in here perhaps instead of the Shang-Chi. And yeah, I think overall the lockdown decks do look very, very good, and we are going to be talking about those a little bit more. So now we're going to move on to the meta report, and then we're going to look at the best performing decks. Now, it's important to remember our sample size is rather small. The patch got delayed by 24 hours. So after the season started, we then had Omega Red getting buffed. We had Hulkbuster change. We had Beast getting changed. So quite a few changes did happen 24 hours into the season. And then the hot location came through shortly afterwards. So we do really have to keep these ones with a pinch of salt. But because the hot location is going to be on for the next 12 hours, I figured we would still take a real look at these decks. And I can just give you my subjective opinions based on being top 500 in the world right now and playing a lot of Marvel Snap. So we won't take a look at these games with small game volume, but we'll maybe just take a quick look to note that Stature's looking quite good. Lockjaw is looking pretty good as well. Lots of very viable decks. Patriot and Phoenix Force. I think Phoenix Force is really underrated right now. But then we can take a look at the other decks. Now, Supergiant comes in right at the bottom, which is interesting. But again, if we look at the most popular deck with Supergiant, it's just a bounce deck with Valkyrie. And I think this is quite misleading then on Supergiant. I think we're going to be seeing a little bit higher up that actually Supergiant is very, very good. And this is just pumping together all the Supergiant decks. We can see that only Eliath is in 40% of these decks. And yeah, I think this is quite misleading. Loki struggling down in the D tier, which is a little bit surprising. I'm quite interested in perhaps checking out Loki with the new Helicarrier. It's probably not great, but it could be worth a try. I think the new Helicarrier is very, very good. Bounce struggling all the way down in D tier, and this kind of supports my thesis that Black Swan is probably not worth picking up. I'm not a huge fan of Bounce in general. Now, Dark Hawk is looking okay as well. This one with Annihilus. Not too much to talk about. I don't think anything really changed in this one. Of course, there's a bunch of different ways of playing Dark Hawk. There's quite a lot of Thanos, which can maybe help Dark Hawk out, but not looking amazing. Living Tribunal is doing decently as well in the C tier. We've got Junk. I hate the word junk. That's such an Americanism. As a British man from England, I don't like the word junk. I like rubbish, or not trash, but I like calling these clog decks. Junk decks, though, looking pretty good. You can play these with or without Annihilus. I do think that Annihilus is a little bit overhyped in some of these decks. I'm a big believer in Daredevil with Titania, and I think that's a deck that people really underestimate, but it's a deck that's pretty hard to play. But now moving on to the top of the meta. Now, bear in mind, a lot of these decks with the lower game volume will be slotting in here. So, like, Bounce isn't actually that bad. Like, it's actually still looking quite strong with the positive cubes overall. Discard. I love the new Helicarrier. So one of the most popular decks here with only 59 games is with Helicarrier, with a Wong, with a Dakin, with a Meek. If you haven't already seen my video I posted yesterday on Discard, it popped off for me. I really like the new Helicarrier. I think it is a serious, serious card. There's also, of course, Black Knight, which is worth considering. Again, we're very, very early on into the season, and this is quite a small sample size, but just to give us an idea. Lockdown is getting pretty high up into the mixer now, with the Supergiant, of course, up in the B tier. It wouldn't surprise me if this actually ends up getting up even higher once people optimize the way of playing this, because I think that really the most important thing for this deck is just getting that initiative. So then you play Supergiant Supergiant on 4, Absorbing Man on 5, Alioth just wins you the game. So that's something to look out for. We've got Destroy still looking very good. Destroy did change slightly with Hulkbuster. They quoted it as a nerf for Deadpool, but I'm not convinced that it is a nerf for Deadpool. You can now Hulkbuster return earlier, which I think is pretty interesting. I'm actually going to be checking out Hulkbuster in move decks as well to see if that has helped move decks at all. Particularly Phoenix Force is a deck I'm really interested in. And I have a feeling that Hulkbuster being cheaper is going to help out move decks more than it's going to help out Destroy decks. But Destroy decks were already very good, and this change to Hulkbuster is not going to make any difference in that. Sarah Control looking pretty good. I'm quite surprised by that. I would imagine that this deck is going to fall off a little bit, and that's because Supergiant is, of course, very good against Sarah. If someone plays Supergiant on turn 4, your Sarah is looking pretty pants. So I would imagine that Sarah decks fall off as more people realize that Supergiant is a very powerful card and start to invest and purchase her. Sheenor is up in the mixer looking pretty solid. This deck is running Leech, which is interesting because, again, Leech is a card which is potentially going to struggle against Supergiant as well. So that's something else to bear in mind, that Sheenor, I think, is probably going to decrease in value because of that. We've got Thanos Lockjaw right up in the mixer. I think you can't really go wrong with Thanos Lockjaw. Noteworthy that there's no inclusion of Black Swan in here. You could include Black Swan in this deck, but I think you're going to be better off without her. I'm actually not a huge fan of Kiera. It's not a card I own, but I don't think that she's necessary at all particularly. She can help the mirrors, I suppose, when your opponent has a Shang-Chi. This Kiera, if you have Black Swan, you could try out Black Swan in that slot. You could also try out Professor X with a Psylocke as well. I do like Leech in a Lockjaw deck, I have to say. I also want to give a shout out to just standard Lockjaw. It's not mentioned here, particularly if you have Beta Ray Bill. It's a card I wanted to pick up, but I was on holiday, so I decided not to. The stats on Beta Ray Bill look amazing, and I'm really surprised that people aren't just playing standard Lockjaw with Beta Ray Bill. I think the deck might be one of the best in the game, so that's definitely a deck you could consider checking out. Hela's actually doing really well. This one is a Black Knight version. Looks pretty damn solid. Of course, you can go Lockjaw, you can go Invisible Woman. There's not exactly many Cosmos doing the rounds at the moment. And with the popularity of, I keep forgetting this lady's name, Supergiant, it might be worth considering playing an Invisible Woman if you're going down like a Modok route. But all sorts of ways you can play it. Black Knight with Lockjaw looks to be the best. I've actually not really touched Hela in a long time, so perhaps it's a deck that I should give a try in the next day or two. Based on how well it's performing, I think it would be rude not to give it a bit of a spin. And finally, right at the top, Beta Ray Bill, which is really interesting to see. I'm not too surprised to see that this deck is doing well. This one is playing Zabu with Miss Marvel. Pay to win card. You see my problem? Like, Zabu is kind of a pay-to-win card in being Series 4. It's been out for long enough now. I still think it's an absolute disgrace, by the way, that Zabu is not a Series 3 card, considering it was locked behind a paywall as a Season Pass card around a year ago. I will be making a video on that. As you can tell, I'm a little bit unhappy about it. But I really hate that then Miss Marvel being the Season Pass card is then making these other Series 5 cards. Like, I would have bought this if I didn't feel like I had to go Miss Marvel. In fairness, I do think Beta Ray Bill of Lockjaw, standard Lockjaw, could be a really good way to go. I'm really surprised that I'm not seeing more people trying that out, to be completely honest. And it is a card I'm quite interested in. So I think next time that it's in reserves, I'll probably try and get my hands on Beta Ray Bill. But those are the best decks. Again, the sample size is super small at the moment, so definitely keep all of this with a pinch of salt. Because the latest patch was delayed by a day, we don't have as much data as we usually would have. And then it's a hot location in the last 12 hours. So this is all the data we've really got to work off for the next 24 hours or so. So I just wanted to bring you this as soon as possible. All right, now we're going to take a look as the final little note at just the best performing decks. So there's a bunch with small game volume. Like this one, for example, has a really good cube rate, but this is probably just one person that's popped off with this deck, right? So I'll take a little skim through them, so you might just want to take a little gander at some of them. Pretty much similar to a lot of the things that we've been seeing, but we're going to focus on the games with the decks with higher stats, more games played overall, because this is kind of meaningless. This is just one person that's been popping off with these decks with the low game volume. Okay, so these are the decks with above 200 games. So we can see that Thanos with Spectrum is looking quite good. This is a deck that I've tried myself. I quite like Sunspot in these lists. It was okay. I'm probably going to post a video on it and try it out a little bit more, but I wasn't massively impressed. I tend to prefer non-Valkyrie versions of Lockjaw, to be honest. We can see a Lockdown deck with a Iceman, which seems a bit random, to be honest. But sure, each their own. I do like the idea of Claw, but I would say that you're better off with even like a simple... I think Nightcrawler could actually be a really good idea in these decks. The reason I would like Nightcrawler is with the Supergiant combo, you're really looking to get initiative for that turn 6. So being able to move the Jeff, the Nightcrawler into a location which is giving you initiative, I think could be a really powerful tool for these decks. So I would suggest trying out Nightcrawler in place of Iceman, and that looks like a really interesting one. Also not sure that Claw is necessarily the way to go. The Legion, I'm also not convinced by. I think you just want cards which are helping you get initiative, so... Absorbing Man as well. You want Absorbing Man, right? So Claw can go for Absorbing Man, would be my hot take. But I don't have, obviously, Supergiant or Miss Marvel, so I can't comment too much. But definitely consider Nightcrawler. Up next, we've got a Dark Hawk deck, which is performing really well with 400 games. There's a Leech in the mix here. There's an Iron Lad. There's a Miss Marvel. There's a Zabu. So that's pretty interesting to see with Black Widow. Unsurprising to see that there's no Grandmaster in these decks. I think Grandmaster proved to be a fun card, but not that powerful. We've got a Supergiant Valkyrie deck looking quite good. Although I'm not really convinced by this deck still. But you could do Absorbing Man Valkyrie, right? I think that's the combo that this deck's looking to pull off with Supergiant. It looks pretty damn interesting. Okay. We've got Bounce looking okay with Werewolf. We've got another Lockdown deck looking pretty good. We've got Junk looking decent with Galactus. Another card I still don't own. I spent my flipping 6,000 tokens on Sentry. Oops. Instead of Galactus. I hate the progression system in this game, as you might tell. We've got another Lockdown deck, this one with a Shang-Chi and a Medusa. The Medusa seems a little bit random, to be honest, but it is helping you get initiative, so I can see the logic somewhat. No Supergiant in this one is important to note. We've got a Hazmat deck with... Abomination with Moon Girl, High Evolutionary. This one looks really fascinating. So Abomination could be absolutely cheap as chips. I might have to try this one out myself, actually. Of course, lots of cards inflicting negative damage. You could also get like a second Wasp with this deck, and then you could get double Abomination. So this looks really interesting, actually. I might have to try this one out myself. This one doesn't play Leech, of course, as well. So it's going to be better against the Supergiant Onslaught, which is going to be coming our way pretty soon. We have another Junk deck, this one with Galactus and Selene. We have Dark Hawk again, this one with Sentry and Annihilus. We have another Bounce deck, this one with Black Swan. This looks like a really nice build. Again, I think I would just like to see an Iron Man when you're playing Bast. I think Iron Man is too good with Bast not to go for. We have a Destroy deck looking very good. This one with an Arnim Zola. Of course, with the X23, you have a lot of ramp potential, so you can get the Zola down and then still play something like Null. This one has cut the Hulkbuster, which is interesting to see. I do think you could still go for the Hulkbuster, though. I think Zola or Hulkbuster are both very reasonable options here. Another Junk deck, this one with Enchantress and Werewolf. We have Destroy here again, this one with the Hulkbuster and without the Zola. This one has 1,000 games, this one has 760 games. They have a, well, actually the one with... Sorry, I got confused there. They're just here. This one has a 60% win rate. This one has a 64% win rate. But this one has a slightly higher average cube rate. But with the win rate and the small sample sizes, it looks like the one with Zola is actually performing better than the one with Hulkbuster. But the sample sizes are very small. Hela looking pretty damn good as well with a lot of games and a very high average cube rate. We have Beta Ray Bill looking pretty good with a lot of games. Destroy looking good again here. This one has a Zola and a Hulkbuster and has cut... has it cut? Deathlock. Yeah, so this one's cut Deathlock. So basically it looks like you're picking between Arnim Zola, Hulkbuster, and Deathlock in Destroy decks right now. Lockdown, this one with the newly buffed Omega Red, which I can absolutely see if you're already playing Zabu. In fact, I really like the look. Yeah, that's the deck. That's actually the deck, mate. Because Omega Red is now, if you're winning here, you get +3 power to other locations. You just focus on winning this one lane with Omega Red, and then you play the flipping Supergiant, and you have initiative. You play the Supergiant into the Omega Red lane, you have initiative. This might just be the best deck in the game. I would like to see Absorbing Man in this deck as well, though. Absorbing Man needs to come in perhaps for the Shang-Chi, perhaps for the Quake. Deck looks absolutely gross. This one very similar with Vision. This one has This is Sheen. I'm actually tempted to buy flipping Supergiant and Miss Marvel. Oh, God. Thanos Lockjaw looking very good still. This one with Kiera. No Black Swan in the mixer here. Sarah Control also looking good. Again, this is going to get a lot worse with the Supergiant popularity. And then this Supergiant deck looking very, very good. I really like the idea of a Mega Red, so I would cut the Iceman for a Mega Red, probably. Try and get Absorbing Man in there, maybe instead of Shang-Chi, and I think you've probably got the best deck in the game right now, so I'm tempted to get these cards and make a video on it, but to be honest, I'll probably swerve it and leave that to someone else. But that would be my recommendation of best deck in the game. If you have Miss Marvel, you have Supergiant, I would cut this Iceman here for maybe a Nightcrawler. I would cut the Jessica Jones for an Absorbing Man, and cut the Shang-Chi for an Omega Red. That's my recommendation. I think that could absolutely well and truly pop off and be completely gross and disgusting. Don't play it! You'll make me sad. Hope you guys enjoyed this meta report. This is a more in-depth look at all the data. If you do want to get Untapped as well as the deck tracker on PC, I do have an affiliate code. So please feel free to get the Untapped tracker using my link. I just get a little bit of money on the side for it. But Untapped obviously has just got the best data available, and I'm not doing this using Untapped because I have an affiliate code. I just have an affiliate code, and this site is just brilliant. So yeah, big shout out to Untapped for all the data. I hope you guys enjoyed this more in-depth look at all the data. I do want to bear in mind, look at the small sample size. This is just because we had the delay in the patch, like the last 24 hours, the first 24 hours of the season, we didn't have a Mega Red Beast Hulkbuster changes, and that's the data we're looking at, is just that small size, because we've now got the hot location, which of course massively skews which decks are being played and what the meta actually looks like. So this week we definitely have to keep the stats with even more of a pinch of salt. In particular, like these decks which are down here, like, can absolutely climb. So I wouldn't necessarily say Beta Ray Bill is the best deck in the game, but obviously it clearly is very strong. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Give it a like, and I'm gonna go because I'm rambling now. Bye.